The house smelled like orange-scented cleaner and old arguing. The engagement ring glittered too bright on Mom's finger, like a lie in daylight. I sat at the end of the table, plate untouched, watching them celebrate my father's absence with wine and jokes that hit like cold glass. The boyfriend, Brandon, laughed first, loud and practiced. Mom laughed second, desperate to make it real. When I was 13, the world had been a kitchen with Dad's boots by the door and his cologne in the coat closet. Now it was a cardboard cutout of a family, Brandon hovering in every photograph like a bad edit. He kept smiling at me the way someone looks at a prize, too long, too steady. People called it charm. I called it hunger. That night, while everyone else sang and clinked, I slipped to the attic. The ladder moaned like a warning. Dust made the air grainy. Boxes breathed the stale heat of secrets. In the dark, I found what I always suspected. Things moved into my house and rearranged us. Behind a radiator, wrapped in plastic like contraband, was a small leather journal. My name, my father's handwriting, traced the edge of the page like proof. He wrote slow, with smudged ink. The entries started like ordinary confessions, bar shifts, repairs, a grocery list, and then turned jagged. There were odd notes about a car parked too long, the name of a motel, receipts missing their matches. A line that read, "He watches us from the corner," scraped cold across my chest. The last pages were raw, written in a tilt that made the letters lean into panic. I didn't hear them come until footsteps, heavy and sure, above the attic hatch. Brandon's boots split the quiet. He peered up sudden, dark, then smiled that practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for something?" he asked, voice syrup thick. I told him it was my old teddy bear. The lie stuck like a splinter. When he climbed up, he breathed wine and cheap cologne into my face. He didn't believe the Teddy story either. He reached for me the way people reach for things they intend to own and said, "You're being dramatic, kiddo." His fingers closed on my wrist and left stars. I should have screamed. I should have run. Instead, I folded the journal against my ribs and slid down the rafters. The attic would bite marked under my palms. When he left, after the door slammed so loud the pictures below rattled, the house took a long, frightened breath. I slept with the journal under my pillow and the memory of his hand like a bruise on the inside of my skin. At school, the classroom was an island of fluorescent normal. I took pictures of the pages, hands shaking so the letters blurred. For the first time, noticing became a weapon. I uploaded the images, created a fake cloud account, and taught myself how to keep a dangerous secret from a woman I still loved. Belief had become mine and mine alone, small and stubborn as a match. That night, I mailed the first letter from a friend's house, ink on a cheap envelope, my fingers smudged from the attic dust. The return address said nothing, but inside I wrote everything. The nightmares, the handprints, how Dad's laugh had always been bright and never strangled. I wrote as if the act of writing could stitch the pieces together, if not for anyone else, for me. I didn't yet know that a piece of paper could change the world. They called it moving on. Mom called it security. I called it surviving in a house that dictated where my jaw should be. Brandon tightened like a cord around the small freedoms I once took for granted. The back door that used to be open for summer breezes, the door to my room that came off its hinges, an apology disguised as a punishment. He claimed it was for my safety. I learned safety meant surveillance. He installed a small blinking camera in the hall. The red dot watched me sleep. At dinner, he watched how I cut my food. He kept forgetting to bring me to the bus and waiting instead in the parking lot like a small, constant eclipse. At school, I pretended that everything was normal, that my laugh was the one I used to practice in the mirror. I am good at pretending. Letters became my proof and my prayer. Dad's replies arrived in cold fonts and warm ink, typed through the prison system, then, staggeringly, on paper soaked in grief. He told me things in margins and between lines. Look behind the radiator, check the receipts, trust your skin. His voice traveled through the bureaucracy and the bars to reach me, and every reply was a small rescue. Uncle Henry was a map back to the old world. He smelled like sawdust and sunlight and had a way of moving through trouble as if it were only furniture that could be rearranged. When I showed him the pictures and the shaky photos of the journal pages, his face collapsed into the right kind of seriousness, quiet, set-jawed. He came with a plan that was half patience, half lumber-handled boldness. We started at the bar that night. The place tasted like stale beer and Friday regrets. Edward, the security guard, had kind, tired eyes and a memory with a crack in it. He remembered Brandon's car, a shadow sliding out right before the trouble. Caroline, who'd called 911 that night, remembered hands and a voice. The manager had an old hard drive in a drawer, dusty and inevitable, like the kind of thing people forget until they need facts to prove a feeling. Each discovery pushed against the wall of the house's lies. Brandon grew colder, his kindness thinning into observation. He left receipts in parks he never visited and then called them up to prove he hadn't. He read my text messages when he wanted and smiled like someone who had practiced the angle. He threatened with casualness. Accidents happen, he said as if the phrase were a weather report. At home he spread a new kind of net. He took my phone, charged it on his nightstand like an offering. He turned my friends into suspects with a raised eyebrow, a rumor on his breath. He began to name a future where I would be grateful that someone had studied my life for me. Gratitude, I learned, was the most dangerous demand. Uncle Henry filmed, he recorded, he made lists of names like prayers. He fed me little victories, a receipt found in a coat pocket, a timestamp from a shift that didn't match Brandon's story. Each one made him speak in a quieter, more urgent tone. "We don't go to the cops with half a story," he told me. "We carry the whole book." He carried it like a ledger and gave me a smile that taught me how to refuse to be small. And still, behind this machinery of justice, I had to act like I believed the lie at home. I hummed along to the songs Mom played, let the world count my face as it pleased. The journal sat wrapped in plastic inside the tank of my bathroom, my small ark, and I photographed, backed up, deleted. I learned to make evidence invisible and then absolute. That was the strange twin of fear, the meticulousness it creates in a person who has to survive. The plan wasn't dramatic. It couldn't be. It was slow accretion, a filmed witness here, a timestamp there, and a grown man underestimating a child's stubbornness. We were building a case and a muscle. The world says children are fragile, but the world forgets that fear makes hands steady and memory fierce. The footage lit like a flare on Brian's laptop. The timestamp crawled across the screen like a steady hand. Brandon entered the bathroom at 9:47 p.m. Dad followed at 9:52 and staggered out at 9:53, face drenched in blood, voice jagged, calling for help. For minutes turned into a life. For minutes were the whole of the frame that had rearranged years. When Uncle Henry hit pause, the room yielded the secret Brandon had tried to bury. The footage didn't lie. It showed premeditation, the timing of a man who'd practiced an alibi like a prayer. It suggested someone planting evidence, someone slipping an argument into a memory until the police took the wrong word and made it law. We copied files on a USB drive that smelled faintly of old smoke. The drive became a talisman. Uncle Henry tucked it into his shirt and looked at me like we were finally two people who had the same map. He kept his voice low. "We don't show this until we can tie it to something physical," he said. "It's the only way they'll take it." That night, inside the house that listened, Brandon's smile slid into something rigid. He began to watch more overtly, following me to the bathroom, standing an inch too close in the hallway. He stopped pretending to be a guest and claimed space like a landlord. He would stand under the pretense of comfort and say, "You're a smart girl," and the words felt like a closing door. I thought the worst of him had a ceiling. I was wrong. On a weekend when Mom was supposed to bring us to a car show, a family thing, she said, Brandon changed the plan and told Mom we were staying at a hotel with adjoining rooms, as if that were normal. That night he came into my room. Wine on his breath. A hand that rehearsed ownership. I pushed him away and hid in the bathroom, palm pressed to the door, listening to his steps until he left. He left a threat in a note carved into the back of his hand, the casual danger of a man who thinks he can buy silence. I had taken to sending frantic emails to the district attorney's office, lines that often rambled, a child's panic trapped in legalese. Weeks passed with no answer, and then, impossibly, a reply surfaced. The message read with adult, careful warmth and a single question that felt like a key. "Did you check where I said?" I read and reread the sentence like a code. Where he said. My brain went back to days when I'd been careless, back to the weekend when I'd begged to visit Dad for his birthday and Mom had said no because Brandon planned the car show. I went to the attic again that night because the attic had become the place that kept truth the way a heart keeps a pulse. Behind the radiator, wrapped again in plastic, the journal had more than words. A folded receipt, whiskey smudged, a motel name printed in block letters, and under it a small photograph, grainy, edges chewed by time, of Brandon and Mom laughing in the bar just before Dad's shift ended. They were too close in the photo. Her fingers clung to his coat like a secret. Heart hammering, I climbed down into the hallway. The house was a slow drumbeat. I tucked the journal into my shirt and started up the ladder. Halfway through, the attic hatch opened and Brandon's shadow poured into the attic mouth like a blot on the sky. He stared at me a while, as if deciding which story to tell himself about what I'd found, then climbed up with a soft, dangerous slow. He moved with the assuredness of someone who believes consequences are someone else's story. He scanned the disarray of boxes I'd made, my stage search, and fixed his eyes on the journal peeking from my shirt, on the proof beating like a small heart against my ribs. Without shouting, he took the journal, flipped it like a casual reader. "Playing detective," he said. I had no plan. I had only everything I had, the recording in my pocket, the photographs I'd uploaded and then deleted, Uncle Henry's steady face, the bar footage on a hard drive. I fumbled for something to make the world listen. Brandon scoffed and dropped the journal into the open, then stepped closer. "If you make this mess," he whispered, "I will make it worse for everyone you love." His voice folded around the attic beams like a rope. The twist was not that I was discovered, it was that discovery released a new motion in the house, like pulling the pin on something that had been simmering. The next moves would not be mine alone, the fight had a louder center now. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Somewhere else, the world began to tip. Brandon tightened his control like a vice. He took my phone. He installed a camera where my door had been. He told my mother I had made it up, that I wrote fantasies about her and him. Mom's eyes slid between us, thin and confused. Shame is a good anesthetic. It silences people who should scream. The original journal, the leather-bound one with Dad's handwriting, had been stolen out of my hands and turned into evidence of fabrication. Brandon used it like a magician uses misdirection, and Mom's fear of scandal made her believe the lie that preserved the neat lines of her life. He suggested, casually and with a fluency in cruelty, that I needed help, maybe a boarding school, far away, no phones, no interference. "It's for your own good," he said. The phrase had become his armor. I planned in whispers. Uncle Henry moved like a shadow that had learned to use light. He found Brian's old hard drive, and Edward's memory gave him details only a tired security guard remembers. Caroline gave a statement that was more memory than obligation. The pieces fit like shards finding their edges. We made copies and kept them in different pockets, hard proof in one hand, the stubborn hope in the other. Brandon's retaliation escalated. He began to be overtly menacing, an accidental shove that left him concerned, a joke over dinner that landed like a threat. He boomed up the stairs at night like bad weather. He said, in the way a man says a line he's thought about, "You'll thank me later." The line promised futures I did not want. I learned to look harmless and move like I was harmless. I started keeping evidence in plain sight, small, dumb things that wouldn't be searched and that would become anchors if all else failed. A key hidden in a hollowed book, a spare USB tape in a candle jar, a photo in the false bottom of a cereal box. This is how you hide a truth in a house that's trying to rewrite you. When Uncle Henry came to the house one afternoon, he did not come with big scenes. He sat at the kitchen table like an ordinary man and poured coffee into mugs that smelled like civility. He slid a USB across the wood to Mom in a careful motion, asked her to watch something with him, told her they'd all watch, like a family. Mom's face was skeptical, but that small thread of curiosity is a thing you can tug at. The footage, once seen in the white light of the laptop, made the kitchen's wallpaper peel back. Mom watched Brandon's silhouette time-stamped entering the bathroom, then leaving before Dad. The way she sucked in air made the room feel fragile. For the first time in months, she looked like someone waking from sleep. Her hand went to her mouth and the coffee trembled in her fingers. Brandon tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. "You're making this into something," he said, voice sliding. He cast glances like small knives. He confessed small slivers in the way that men confess when they think they can bargain with truth. "I did things for the family," he said, vague and dangerous. It wasn't enough. Mom's disbelief cracked. She saw photos of receipts, a motel name, his handwriting on a napkin from the bar. The blinds closed, a slow shudder across the house's false brightness. Mom's eyes filled with an awful combination of shame and recognition. She had been looking at a future she wanted so badly she had ignored the way he looked at me. She had been tired and lonely and afraid and vulnerable to a man who smelled like the night. Brandon's tone changed. He pushed, and for the first time, I saw panic behind the practiced grin. He reached for a phone. "I'll call the police," he said with the perverse righteousness of someone who's never been asked to account for himself. The last thing he expected was to be exposed in front of the woman he used like a mirror. In a moment that smelled of detergent and rotten oranges, everything fell loose. Mom grabbed a kitchen knife, not with the intent of killing, but with the intent of cutting the thread of denial, and demanded he leave. He backed up, voice changing to an ugly, small thing. He ranted venom about secrets and blackmail, about how lucky they'd been, and for the first time he dropped the mask. He named the worst of possibilities and laid them on the table. And then, in a way only truth can, his arrogance betrayed him. He started to brag, to explain the meticulousness of the frame, as if telling the story would reassure him. "I put the knife there," he said, voice slippery with adrenaline, telling details like self-incriminating proof. He told of plans and receipts and how he'd used timing to make the world look a certain way. Mom's knees went weak. The groceries fell. Oranges rolled like small suns across the tile. For months I had been the only person to see the pattern. Now the house gathered the evidence and the hysterical corners of Brandon's speech and folded them into something a detective could hold. I recorded everything. Quietly. My hands were steady because I had practiced steadiness in the dark. I pressed the record button and let the rest of the scene run like a film that had trapped a liar. Brandon's confession came like a blade slipped into warm water, shocking in its intimacy. He didn't shout initially. He spoke with a slow, gloating rhythm, as if reciting a success story. He revealed details only someone who engineered a crime would know. The knife swapped, the planted prints from a collection of gloves he'd bought and deliberately soiled, the timing that turned a bartender's hurried glance into a prosecutor's definitive narrative. Mom heard it all. The groceries fell and oranges rolled like evidence. She listened while the color siphoned from her face. She had been a woman who chose security over suspicion, who traded questions for quiet. But standing in the kitchen, the raw audio of what happened was a crucible. She could no longer compress it into the comfortable myth she needed. "Get out," she told him finally, the words small but final. He laughed first, then tried to backpedal, to cajole, to threaten. He held up his hands like a man pretending to be harmless. He spoke of things he would do. He suggested he had papers, dirt, reasons he could ruin people. He looked at Mom, and for a long second, she looked smaller than him in a way that felt unbearably human. But the recording I'd made on Ashley's phone was there, pulsing with his voice. Brian's footage was there, the hard drive zipped and copied. The bar staff statements lined up like a scaffold. The detectives who came later called it an avalanche. One piece of proof slid and pulled others with it, unstoppable. For the first time, someone else's eyes read what I'd been living. Brandon left, angry, sputtering, raw with humiliation. He slammed the door in a way that suggested the house itself would remember. He said it wasn't over. He threatened secrets and shame, a white noise of coercion. We sat afterwards on the kitchen floor, and the light made thin lines across the tile. Mom cried in ragged, new ways, each tear a medal on a wound she'd been hiding with shopping and apologies. The detectives came late that night. They moved carefully, like surgeons. They took the journal with gloved hands, watched the footage frame by frame until verification breathed its professional calm across the room. One detective, later to become a small hero in this piece of our life, told us they had thought Dad's conviction was tidy, an easy close in a messy case. But they'd had a rumor of doubt. My evidence turned rumor into necessity. Brandon's arrest was rapid once the warrant hit. He'd left town, but routine checks and tips, construction guys, motel clerks, a coffee shop barista who remembered a man who'd talked too much, led the police to a motel on the other side of town. He tried to run, and he didn't get far. Some monsters are loud when they try to flee. Some are quiet and small when they face the consequence. They found the real knife in his trunk, a locking box he'd kept like a talisman. Forensic work tied his prints to places only the perpetrator could have touched. Everything clicked: the angle of the wounds, the timing on the footage, the motel receipt. The case began to flip like a page in a book that had all along been turned to the wrong chapter. Dad's release came like a strange sunrise. He walked out of the prison gates with the look of a man carrying a long winter into an awkward spring, thinner, older, but still solid in the places that count. We met him at the gate, the world reduced to that small, monumental hug. He smelled like industrial soap and hope. "You kept me," he said into my hair, and his voice broke in a way that showed every night behind bars had been an accumulation of small exiles. The trial that followed read like a catalog of a predator's design. Witnesses lined up not just in our town but across state lines. The prosecutor showed patterns: a man who found the lonely and the grieving, who made himself indispensable, then lethal. Brandon tried to parse his way out with legal strategies, but the evidence had texture and smell. It was not a theory. It had the blue pulse of surveillance footage and the rust of receipts. When the jury read guilty, it felt less like relief and more like a punctuation that made the story readable. He got life. He sat at the table with a face that no longer fit the smile. He looked at me then, and I looked back. Not at first with triumph, but with the knowing of someone who'd had to become brave because no one else started brave enough. Dad was home after 8 months that had been a universe long. There was no cinematic clear-cut cure. Trauma sticks to people like stains, but there was the relief of the immediate, freedom, the end of the immediate danger, the chance to change the future we were building. We rebuilt like people patching a fence where the posts had been kicked down. It took weather and stubborn hands and the kind of ordinary repetition that seeds new habit into bones. Dad worked construction with Uncle Henry, calloused hands and honest dirt, and came home evenings smelling of sawdust, lighter somehow for toil that demanded nothing but honest sweat. Mom left the house after weeks of quiet bargaining with herself. Some betrayals changed the shape of a person permanently. She moved to a small apartment across town, where the distance was an attempt at penance and survival. She wrote letters at first, long and wrung with remorse. I sent most of them to the bin. Forgiveness is its own labor, and I was not yet ready for that job. Caroline, the bartender, became a small, luminous piece of what came next. She came over for movie nights and to make Dad laugh in ways that didn't cave in the room. She brought soup when I was sick and never tried to pry into the places where our scars still hurt. She arrived as if in the right place, a friend and eventually more. Mr. Whiskers the cat inspected everything and claimed Dad's chair with the entitlement of someone who assumes comfort by right. School never went back to normal. There were whispers and looks that felt like old paper, thin and fragile. Some people were kind. A few pretended the whole thing was an entertaining spectacle. Ashley stuck by me. Uncle Henry's kids called Dad Coach and dumped their pockets of baseballs on our lawn. It was messy and it was healing in a way that was not theatrical but steady. Dad testified at the hearing. He wore his wedding suit, the same one he'd kept because when you love someone you keep fragments, even when the world tells you they're useless. He spoke about the bar, about the day he was taken. He told the court that his deepest failure was in not protecting his child. I watched him from the room and saw a man who had been beaten by a system, but had been made human again by evidence and faith clutched across a kitchen table. Brandon got sentenced to life without parole. The judge read the list of crimes like a ledger and slotted him into the place where men who manipulate and break should be kept. He left behind a wake of families he'd harmed. The prosecutor said they were opening old files, revisiting other mansions of guilt he'd built on other people's trust. Months blurred into a year. I turned 15 and then 16. Dad bought a new truck with some of the settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. He said he wasn't keeping score with money, he just wanted a new tool to pull life forward. We had a party that felt unreal, Uncle Henry's ribs of laughter, a bounce house, high school kids awkward with balloons. I watched Dad grill burgers with a tenderness that looked like triumph. I studied criminal justice on scholarship because the way they had taken my father made me understand what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be the kind of person who could patch the holes in a system and give others the map I'd had to make. The nightmares didn't stop overnight, but therapy taught me the language of slow repair. I learned to sleep without waking at every creak. On the porch the night before I left for college, Dad and I sat with iced coffee cooling against our palms and the sky doing its small, patient work. Fireflies stitched the air. He squeezed my hand and said, "I'm proud of the woman you've become." I said, "I'm proud of the father who kept his faith in me," and we both laughed until the laugh turned into the kind of quiet that means peace. Mom sent one last card on my 18th birthday, no return address, small and cheap. I slid it into my desk drawer and left it there like a fossil you check on sometimes. Maybe she'd find peace in some other town. Maybe some bridges never rebuilt. But the porch swing creaked with the weight of our new, chosen family, Dad, Caroline, Uncle Henry, Ashley. We had been broken and we'd put ourselves back together with hands that knew where to hold. Sometimes I walked past the bar where it had started, the neon flicker like a bad memory, and I felt a gravity in my chest that was more belonging than anger. I had been a child who kept letters and textbooks. I had been the small, stubborn light that survived a storm meant to snuff it. The truth had been heavy and costly, but it had landed like a net. My father and I had been given time again. We used it to be ordinary, awkward school nights, shouted recipes, road trips with windows down. We learned that the meaning of home is not what's under your roof, but who chooses to stay. The worst things had happened. They did not become beautiful. They became reasons sometimes to fight. And when the world turned toward new stories, I chose a life that would make sure other people's truths would have someone to hold them up, not just to be believed, but to be heard and acted upon.